You're listening to Ship Fam, the new podcast by Luke Spaghetti and I, where we talk about indie bootstrapping with Flutter and friends. This is our first episode where we bring on Brandon Trautmann to talk about Lumy, his Flutter-based companion to the home finance app You Need a Budget. Please share us and give us feedback on Twitter at KCCRogers and at Luke_Spaghetti, and review us wherever you get your podcasts.
So today we've got Brandon on the pod. This is Brandon. How do you pronounce your last name? Is it Trautmann?
Yes, that's correct as the Americans would say it. Apparently it's different in Germany, but I'm not German, really. So that works.
Gotcha. Well, Brandon, we have been familiar with Brandon for a while because he posts about his build in public journey on Twitter. And I believe your app is called Lumy. Is that right?
That is correct.
So do you want to give us like a short version of what problem you're trying to solve or what inspired you to kick off that journey? Because it's kind of, you've been doing it for a while, and I saw this really funny picture the other day that says, we didn't do it because it was easy. We did it because we thought it was going to be easy. And this feels like it may be one of those projects.
Oh, I think this project, I've worked on like a bunch of little side apps here and there, but honestly, it's folks like you that have kind of pushed me to take those from like little things that I throw out after a month to things that I actually kind of like get out there into the hands of real users. And this is probably the first thing that I've ever done kind of to this extent. But you're right, it's been unique from other things in the sense that, well, I guess I'll start with what it kind of aims to solve. It's a companion app to a first-party application called YNAB, which a lot of people haven't heard of, but it's like pretty popular like in the personal finance space. It stands for You Need a Budget, so YNAB. And it's a budgeting app. And kind of like it's zero-based budgeting, so you just like tell it what money you have and what you want it to do, and you sort of just budget from there. But in the way of like reports and data and metrics and stuff, it doesn't offer a whole lot. And I think as they're part of their methodology, like they're not going to delve too much into that area because they're really focused on the human aspect of how we budget and not so much the like retroactive looking at past data and stuff like that. They're very forward centric, which is fine. But there are a lot of people, maybe like me and maybe others even more nerdy than myself, that kind of want that data just to kind of inform future decisions. And so I built Lumy because their API is public. So I built Lumy as a way of taking all that data in and just like giving you a bunch of metrics and a bunch of reports and charts and stuff like that for the nerds out there. And I guess I would say the one unique thing about it to like put a bookend on the sort of what it is that it's really privacy focused. So everything is local, which I as a user really appreciate. I know a lot of other users do, especially when you're like giving someone your YNAB. You're not really giving me your YNAB credentials, but you feel like you are because you're signing into their, like it's all through OAuth and stuff like that. You want to just know that it's all on your phone. And so that makes it really hard though, because all of that data is like on your phone. And so I kind of alluded to in my thread earlier in Twitter is that like, if I ship a bug in either the database, or I ship a bug in the logic, which there is so much logic, I have to like go through the whole app store process of like getting a bug fix out there. Meanwhile, like someone's net worth is like totally incorrect or their income expense report is like totally incorrect. So it's been like a really big challenge to figure out how I can do that in like a robust way. And so, yeah, that's why Lumy's been pretty interesting.
That's awesome. Now, I like how you've You Need a Budget has like this core product offering and it's really strong at that, but it's not really strong on the retrospective. And it seems like you guys are going really strong on the retrospective. Do you have like a favorite chart, or is there like something that you developed that you're like super stoked about in the app?
Yeah, so back to my thread, like I have been so shocked at the way that I want to see data versus the way that others want to. So my favorite charts there's two charts, the daily net income chart and the days of buffer chart. And the daily net income chart shows you, it basically takes your paychecks and it spreads them out and says like you've spent this much over this time period and you've been paid this much over this time period. Well, how much money are you making like per day based on your expenses? I like that. I think it's cool if it's positive, and if it's negative, you like in parts of your life, you know why. You can look at that data. Other people like were so confused by like why you would even want to like track that. And that was like mind blowing to me. I'm like, this is like what it comes down to. If you're net overall, then like you're going in the positive direction. But if you're like negative, like you want to know that. But more people just kind of conceptualize that as net worth. Like they see the bar go up or the bar go down. I like to look at it in a little bit differently of a way. So the other one, days of buffer, is kind of more obvious, where it's just like, this is how much money you have, and on average you spend this much money. If you lost your job today or lost your source of income, like it's your runway, right? Awesome. And that to me is super interesting. And what I love about that chart for me specifically is like, we bought a house, so my runway was huge, and then it went down a lot. and then we like built that runway back up, and then we replaced our roof, and it went down a lot. And then, like, so you can kind of see this cool roller coaster of runway. So I think that's really cool. Other users care more about the bread and butter, like income expense, net worth, spend by category, spend by payee, things like that. So those are in there, obviously, but to me, like the unique charts are where it's at.
It's interesting because when you're talking about daily net income, immediately it made me think of calorie trackers, where it's like your body weight is almost like the thing that's changing over time, but then you have like that daily metric of what your intake is. And it's almost like you've created something similar to that, but on the financial side.
Yeah, if you're trying to do any kind of habit like forming, it's really about those small incremental wins that are above that zero line. And so that's what it feels like with finance. Like I kind of just care that I'm like incrementally improving versus, anything else. So yeah.
The other thing that really resonates with me is this like founder versus customer needs. So every time I go to start an app, I'm like, oh my God, nothing out there does what I wanted to do. I'm going to build the thing that's going to work great for me. And then I ask other people to use it, and their needs are like so wildly different from my own. It's like almost a challenge to find somebody who actually has the same needs as me.
Yeah, which makes it really hard when like you kind of put all this excitement and effort into something, and then you find out that like users don't like resonate with the problem or the solution the same way. And I think that's what's been helpful with like building an audience, kind of the build in public journey, is like finding those users who do sort of have the same problem, want the same thing, and then shaping the app. Like I always started by shaping it out around me, like you said, but now there's sort of this pivot where it's like you shape it around your most engaged like users and like solve the problem that they have. And that's what I've been kind of working on lately.
That's exactly what happened with Groceryless Pro. Is like I made Groceryless Pro for me and my partner, and she and I had these very specific needs that were very straightforward. And then I was like, okay, this is working great for us. We've had this like in production in the household for like 2 years. And so then I was like, yeah, it's been a long time. And so then I was like, all right, well, let's get a bunch of people into this app. Like, clearly it's awesome, right? Like, that was my first mistake. Clearly it's awesome because it works for us. Then we get a bunch of people in, and they're like, yeah, this is like totally missing a bunch of stuff that's like kind of table stakes in a groceryless app that I had never even considered. And so then it was like a total pivot, like you said, and trying to figure out like how to meet their needs.
All right. I saw you had a Discord. I was wondering what kind of engagement you're getting there, and if you're getting a lot of feedback from users through Discord.
Yeah, it's here and there. Like there's about just a little bit less than 100 people in there right now, and they sort of trickled in. There was like a lot of people that joined on one day, which was because someone mentioned it on Reddit, and so like a bunch of people just like flowed in. I would say honestly though that like only like less than 10 are like fully engaged. Like they're in there a lot. They're requesting features, and about half of those are like my alpha testers. I shipped a database migration at one point, and that went from like ESAR, which was a NoSQL database, to Drift, which I'm now using, which will in future support web, going to web. And in doing that, I needed like testers to test this before I just like shipped it to everybody, because I was worried about some like crazy database issue and like you lose all your data. So anyway, those 5 testers were the folks that I was like, hey, like take this build, and that luckily everything was smooth. But yeah, it's like those 5 people I feel like that are really engaged, and then most of it is just like folks kind of trickling in, checking out what's going on and everything like that. But that's been okay. It's been fine. So
yeah, I saw on Twitter you were talking a lot about test flight and the Google testing tracks, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your experience there and how you're managing testing now with users.
Yeah, so I started on both of those. I just like right out of the gate, I shipped to those first. Like it was a big like to do to go to the App Store, because I was like a little intimidated by it, because I know you have to like at that point, that's when you go through like the most rigorous approvals before you like get out there. So I just went to Test Flight. I went to the Play Store. Again, even on Google, it's the same thing, like very easy to get onto your internal and your closed tracks. So I did that for like a long time. And I think Luke alluded to this in one of his tweets, like, I shouldn't have done it for as long as I did. I think once you get over that initial barrier to entry of just like shipping to production, then like you're kind of there and you can just iterate and like move quickly. But so I used TestFlight for a while, and TestFlight has a lot of positives, especially the ability to like downgrade versions, which you can't really easily do on Google Play. And testers were pretty much happy with it, especially those who were like trying to beta test. Like they're okay with, I think, going through that initial barrier entry. But I do think that kind of like to what I said in that thread, in the future, just because there's those barriers for the users and for me to get to the production tracks, I will not use it in the future, because 99% of the cases of things I want to test, they can be feature flagged.
Yeah.
The problem that I'm like worried about, and by the way, I've been using feature flags the whole time, which is like in a way kind of redundant a little bit, unless you're like sometimes shipping straight to like the open testing and sometimes shipping to a lower track. But like I've been using them the whole time, so they were always there. But there's a 1% of cases where I am hesitant, and that is things like database migrations. Because I don't know how you guys feel about that, but like it would have been so much more complex to feature flag a database migration, especially when you can't really roll it back. Like, so I just chose not to feature flag that, and I actually ended up building an export feature so that if the database migration went terribly, you just export it, and like it was just this little JSON file you saved on device, and then you could import it back. So, but that's like few and far between, and I know now more than I did before that database migration. Like look into things like, oh, does Flutter Web support this, or does this package support Flutter Web, etc. So I don't know. You'll never be able to avoid them, but I don't want to. Again, in my thread, I said I don't want to optimize for the 1%. I want to optimize for the 99%, and then hopefully have the escape hatch for the 1% of cases where like feature flags are going to be hard.
And actually, I learned this from Casey. So I did my test flight beta, and it was a really long beta. And I did it even worse. So I had the test flight beta, and then I started running paid ads on trying to get people into the beta. Like, that's how bad it was, right? Like, I was really going all in on making this as bad as possible, apparently. And so what I found out later in talking to Casey is he was basically like, bro, what are you doing? Just ship it to prod, use feature flags. And like, I'm very comfortable with feature flags. Absolutely happy to use them. And so that's kind of where I'm at now. The next app I do, I'm definitely going to go right to prod with feature flags.
Yeah. Well, on my end, I have kind of different levels of user, and I can put in a database what level they are. And then on initialization, I check the database and I set to Firebase Analytics. You're an MVP user, you're an alpha test user, or you're like a store paid pro user. And then I can use that to key all my feature flags. I'm curious if you developed a similar system for managing them.
So I'm currently in the process of moving from Google Analytics to PostHog because I find it to be like so much. And I'm getting again a lot of this from you guys, a lot of this from like other people, like is Elizabeth Hogg, I think that's doing Mini Hog now. Like a lot of folks that like I'm just getting a lot of kind of like ideas about software to use from that. And it's like so much better. I've already integrated, and like I wasn't even defining users in Firebase before with Google Analytics, and now I'm going to be doing a lot more robust analytics in PostHog. Just it's a lot easier, I think, a lot more easier to grok. But what I'll say is that I kind of shot myself in the foot, and Luke, I think I talked to you about this, but like with analytics, I have my app set up that like it doesn't track a single thing about you until you opt in. So what that means is it makes it really hard, though, for signals, for things like what you're saying. We're like getting a full swath of users and putting them into buckets of like different tiers of users. And then also for even like issues. So if I was tracking like logins, let's say, and all of a sudden I see a huge downtick in like login rate because I don't have like then if I had analytics on that, then I would be able to know there's an issue in production. But if I don't have any analytics until you opt in, then and that's only being done after login, I lose a lot of signal between when you become a user and when you opt into analytics. And so to answer your kind of questions, I don't really have, I can't rely too much on analytics because I wanted to have folks just be able to opt into it. And so everything right now is being done, like alpha testers are purely opt-in through like Discord or something, and I can add them to a group in remote config, which is what I'm still using for feature flags. And then I'm going to tie all users into PostHog, and I'll be able to do some like cohort stuff there. But yeah, like analytics, I really can't rely on too much, unfortunately.
That's really tough. I don't even know how you do privacy plus analytics at the same time. I feel like opt-in is the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, I incentivize users a little bit because at one point, and I actually might have changed this, but at one point I did not set you up with remote config because that relies on your Firebase installation ID. And I basically didn't want to like have any kind of identification for things at all until you opted in. And so I wouldn't let you sign up or like get integrated with remote config. And then therefore you couldn't get feature flags enabled for you until they were like fully just like true by default. So I basically set in like a little banner like, hey, you won't get new features until you opt into analytics. And then at that point you'd get hooked up with remote config and you'd get newer features as they rolled out. But I actually don't think that there's like I don't know that that's like a strong requirement. Like I think that you can use the Firebase installation ID because it's not like identifying like without having them like opt in. And I'm talking mostly about like, what is it? GR, whatever the heck.
GRPC.
What is it?
GRPC.
Whatever the heck it's called. I try to like look, read those, like read like the fine print there and like understand what I'm allowed to do.
GDPR, right?
GDPR, yeah.
GRPC, GDPR.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
So you can tell how much I read because I don't even know what it's called. But yeah, I'm trying to be like, I want it to just be proactive there because eventually I think rightfully so, those restrictions will kind of broaden to affect more countries and affect more people. So yeah, that's kind of why I have it set up like that. But anyway, that was a tangent into the disgusting details of analytics and stuff.
On GDPR specifically, I know there's a lot of pieces to it. It's an octopus with many, many tentacles. But the core one to think about with respect to analytics is that the user has a right to be deleted. And so if they request deletion, they need to be deleted within 90 days. And that one is kind of tough to effectively manage outside of analytics because you need user data to stick around. The really sticky part is if a user requests deletion of their user data, you need to create a request in a record, a database, and then once you've done the deletion, you need to delete that they ever requested the deletion. So this gets extremely mind-bendingly confusing. With analytics, there's a much, much simpler story, and that's just if you're willing to just nuke all data after 90 days, then you're safe because the grace window for request for deletion is 90 days anyway. So that's kind of a pretty standard quick and dirty practice where you can log, of course, anonymized, and Firebase does that out of the box for you. You anonymize the analytics, and then as long as it's deleted within 90 days, you're GDPR safe. With the obvious caveat, I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah, I'm not a lawyer. That's what I always think of every time somebody asks me about GDPR. I'm like, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't care about it until I need a lawyer.
My problem was when I tried to look into it because my initial goal was just to keep everything like working as is, not have opt-in and everything. But when I tried to find like the easy, like super easy button click hooks to like kind of request deletions from Google servers, I couldn't really find like an easy way to do that.
Yeah.
And I couldn't really get a good answer without going like 17 pages deep into Google's docs on like what their default retention policy was. So it scared me enough to just say like, I'm just going to make it be opt-in by default so that like, because I guess I'm more of a conservative person. I was like, I'll have them opt in, and if that way, it's like you did it, like it's your, kind of your fault.
Right. They asked for it.
You know what I mean? Like, I didn't do anything, so that was my approach. But I honestly, like, I have friends, other indie devs that do the same thing. They just like they're not going to worry about it until it's like a thing. So
yeah, I've noticed others doing the opt-in. I think it's a good option here. I got some nerdy stuff questions if you're down for that. So the first one is, I noticed you've got some pretty nice charts, and you're using Flutter, as I understand. And charting in Flutter is like a whole topic in and of itself. So what's your experience there with charting?
Yeah, my experience has been that it's been hard. It was hard to find a package that I was happy with. I looked at like 2 or 3 or 4. I started with FL charts or FL chart, I think. Once I moved to my current package, I realized how underwhelming FL Chart was. And I don't mean that to be a dig. I think that's like an open source, like side project for somebody. And for what it is, it's awesome. It's way more than I could ever do. So let me just say that right off the bat. But where I moved to is more of an enterprise solution, Sync Fusion, Flutter charts. I wouldn't be surprised if that's what Minihog uses because it looks a little bit similar. But it offers like a ton of flexibility. The API is actually much cleaner and more friendly than FL Chart in my experience, just in terms of how you build a chart. And yeah, it has bugs. I'm like maybe a top bug filer in that repo, but they're super responsive. Like they tell you when the root cause has been identified. They tell you when it'll be patched. They tell you when it has been patched, et cetera, because they're offering that solution to enterprise, companies too. Like, so they make money from it. And so I think they're incentivized to like make their customers happy. And so in that regard, I've been really happy with it.
Man, Sync Fusion, those guys are the GOATs. They definitely saved the day when it came to getting any kind of charting in Flutter. Because at that time, I'm trying to think of when this was. It must have been around 2019, I think. There was some Google packages for charting, like material charts. And they were just like no offense, Google, but they were pretty janky. And then Sync Fusion came out of nowhere, and they just released like an awesome data table. They did gauges, they did charts, they did bar charts, they did radar and spider charts, they did like everything you can think of. And they just dumped it on the scene in like a period of like 6 months. It was like pretty heroic lift on their side. So it's pretty cool that you're using them. I was curious though, I know that people have questions about their licensing. Did you look into any of that or have any thoughts on it for like the size of your app?
Yeah, so technically, I think you need to request a license even just to use them, but you get it for free if you're under $1 million in annual
Oh,
revenue,
that's
I want to
cool.
say. So it's like something crazy, like totally fine for any pretty much indie dev to use. And so I like requested a license. I think them approving you, like you get an email and it gives you access to like all of their technologies on like all their stacks. And
Amazing.
then again, once you hit that revenue threshold, that's when you start paying, which I have no idea how much. I think it's expensive because I looked
You'll
into it for
find out when you get
my
there. It's kind of like me with GDPR. Like you're doing with cash, I'm doing with legal, apparently.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think it's very expensive once you get to that threshold, but I personally, it's like I haven't said this yet, but Lumi for me is not my goal is I mean it'd be awesome to make like real money off of it, but my goal is really I'm really doing it for fun and for learning and having conversations like this and learning from folks like you guys because and that's like my primary goal with like right now it's doing $10 of MRR, so
Love it.
so I don't think it's going to pay my bills, but I'm having fun.
You're
doing it,
actually
so.
right behind Groceryless Pro, so feel good. So here's my next question. I seem to remember you playing around with couple different state management patterns in the app. It looked like you may have been using it a little bit as a bit of a test bed at some point. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean that leads right from my point about it being kind of a learning bed for me is like I'm a little bit manic in my architecture preferences. So Lumi's had like 6 different architectures using like 3 or 4 different state management solutions. I don't know what I even started. Luke, you might remember better than I do with what I started with. Like
You had a river pod at one point, I believe.
yeah,
And then
okay.
did you have signals at some point?
So signals are currently being used,
Got it.
not signals .dart from Rody, but Beacon
Yeah.
or Dart Beacon,
Yeah.
I guess,
Yeah.
from I don't even know what his name is, but yeah. So it went from RiverPod, which was really great for again for speed of development, but I have a lot of async like operations, and I found that I was having a lot of issues, like the ref that you use to like reference other providers was constantly being like disposed of in between async gaps, and I just had a lot of like it would blow up my console. Runtime was like okay, but it would like blow up my console, and it just felt brittle because it kept being like, oh, this ref was disposed, and like I don't know. I was confused about how to like you couldn't dive into the code because RiverPod is like once you get in there, it's like scary.
Yeah.
So I ran out of that and I went to Signals. I don't know. Before that, I threw in some blocks just to like
why
go
not?
back to like because why not? Threw in some blocks. Didn't actually using Qubit because I think like no one should ever use block. Pretty much use Qubit.
Yeah.
But I ripped that out of there after like a couple qubits that I introduced, and then I was like so excited about Signals. I thought they were like RiverPod Lite kind of thing. Like did they just do the thing they're supposed to do? And so I went to Signals. I tried out Rody Davis's, but it was missing a lot of like the RiverPod-esque things that I liked.
agree. Yeah.
So then like, what's his name? Genius, J-I-N-Y-U-S.
Yeah,
on
Genius.
GitHub. Genius. He did the state beacon, and he was like super responsive
Very
and like
responsive.
just added a bunch of stuff. And, like yeah, you can see he wants this package to succeed as bad as we want our apps to succeed. Like he just added a bunch of the RiverPod-esque stuff. And so I just like started using it like literally like in beta, like it was like probably not even really ready to be in a production app, and I migrated my entire application to it. So I'm using that now. And I'm pretty happy with it. My like pretty much my setup is I have stores all over the app. They're just like these classes. They're nothing special about them. And I have inside them a bunch of signals that exposes like data. And so like for the transaction data, like the charts basically, I just have a transaction store and it just crunches a bunch of numbers in those signals and exposes them as like async values that get rendered in the charts. And that's like literally all my app does. There's like nothing. I used Provider for a bit to provide these stores. I think you remember that, Luke, and you were like, what are you doing? And I was like, I don't know. And so I switched that all. To get it. So now to my thread, I kind of threw out there that I'm just basically like, they're all kind of global. And in a sense, they all were before. They were just providers that I was creating and like shoving in the tree at the top level. So if I'm really treating them as global anyway, I might as well just like make them proper globals, like inside of an app, like dependency container. And so now like all of the stores are just served up in a dependency container. And I just like reference basically all of them globally. And then in tests, I can just like tear down and set up that container as needed to like test a store in isolation if I want to, or test the app as a whole.
Love it.
So it works pretty well.
Yeah, I got a couple thoughts on this. So first of all, State Beacon. I really wish it was called State Bacon because I always mistype it. Every time I go to type it, I type State Bacon by mistake. So I just want to say that. Next thing, I don't know what this guy's actual name is, but Genius, I made an issue on State Beacon's repo, and it was what you were talking about. I was like, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it's something like, let's be able to compose multiple stream signals together so you can have like one stream signal depend on another one. And he saw my issue And I think it was like 20 minutes later, he had it written with test coverage and pushed to pub. And I was like, this dude is crazy. So that was pretty awesome. I'm just curious. I want to talk about the global stuff, but now that you've used State Beacon for a while, are you planning on staying on this? Like, are you feeling pretty cozy with it, or are you looking for something else?
No, right now I have no reservations. I think literally, if I had to call out one downside to State Beacon, and this I think is true of Signals as well, is that there are still some foot guns, specifically around async gaps. So if you have a signal that has a bunch of dependencies, and some of them are async, if you if you have an async gap, so like an await on something, and then you register implicitly another signal dependency later by calling .value on a signal,
sure,
that dependency will not get registered. And so you need to like be really careful about async gaps. I ran into this as well with I had a stream beacon or a stream signal that I was creating through an async generator, like so that was producing the stream, and that itself was treated as like an async function, and so it was not like no values or no signals inside of it were being registered. So there's foot guns in terms of that are not explicit. I think RiverPod maybe made a little bit more explicit, or at least like just didn't feel like it had as many. But I have, aside from those, once you get used to the ergonomics of it, like it works really well. I think it's efficient in terms of performance. And like it just like it's pretty straightforward, and it's just like I said, RiverPod Lite. There's no like extra bells and whistles that it does. It just does the thing. So I'm gonna stay on that for as long as I can and try to be less manic about switching to different things.
Fair enough. We should ask Dimitri from Dark Code Metrics to write a linter for the async gap stuff for State Beacon, because if he
so it has a linter actually.
Oh, it does. Okay, that's cool.
It does have a linter. I have done some custom lints. Like we built out custom lint stuff at work, and the problem is like the IDE memory consumption is like so bad for custom linters that I'm just like scared to integrate any of them. But I haven't tried it, so maybe it's improved since then. But
so this is getting a little inside baseball, but was that around the same time that you guys were having trouble with barrel files in Betterment?
Dude, we had both going on. Can you imagine an IDE that has 30-something packages inside of it with custom linting package that's running like on the analysis server with all barrel files, like all 38 packages had public, barrel files.
Yeah.
So like, anytime you changed a file, it was linting it with like every single package creates, I think, like a copy in memory for the linter, and then it was trying to resolve everywhere. So it was an absolute nightmare. Like nobody could do anything. And so yeah, we nuked both of those, and now pretty much all of our feature packages just have like a public lib folder that like everything just can import from. But it was bad, dude. It was so bad.
That's amazing. Is that your coworker? What is his name? Neil? Is that his name?
Yeah.
He kept DMing me. He would like DM me every day, and he'd be like, "Dude, this barrel file thing is crazy." And because we were like dealing with something similar to Tonal at the time, so I really enjoyed like getting looped in by Neil on that project. That was pretty funny.
It was so bad.
Casey, you had something?
Yeah. Could you just give everybody some background on your day job at Betterment? And one thing I was curious about too is how it compares and contrasts your Flutter work in kind of a corporate environment versus Lumy with just your side project, and if you end up with very different engineering approaches there.
I am so glad you asked that, because one of the questions I've been wanting to ask Luke for like 2 years is like I sit here and I read Twitter, I'm like, there's no way he ships like this at Tonal. Like I just can't imagine a world, like I can't imagine it. So, but maybe you do, like maybe that, like, so I'll answer for myself, and Luke, I would love to hear from like what you guys do. But yeah, so I work at Betterment. I'm going to tread really carefully, because I'm not in the fine print. I don't know exactly what I'm allowed to say. So I'll say nothing inside baseball beyond, it's an investing application. And so obviously in the same vein, really important that we get numbers right. I'll say that. And so testing has a really high threshold in our application. And so there's like totally different engineering principles that I personally apply, where like everything kind of needs to be testable in my opinion at Betterment. Whether or not we test it is a different question, but whether or not it can be tested if needed, if we feel like, oh, this is a critical thing that we should be testing. And like at Lumy, like my approach is I test nothing unless like it's really critical to the application. So like some of these calculations and filters that I apply to transactions, like if they're wrong, like the whole application is wrong. So I test some of those things. But definitely different engineering principles, I would say, between like my primary day job and side projects. I think I answered all your questions. I can say more public stuff about Betterment if you're interested. But
yeah, cool. I don't know how much exactly I'm allowed to see.
I just want to see like a full diagram of your exact stack. Maybe share your private API keys while you're at it.
So
Yeah.
that's funny. So I can actually share one thing about tonal, which I think is kind of interesting. At some point in our history, we decided we were looking at like how we wanted to maybe just kind of restructure how we were doing things on the Flutter side of things. And one of the things that I suggested was, we were doing code reviews on every single diff, right? Every single PR, which is like standard practice. And what we were noticing is that people were spending the time doing these thoughtful code reviews, but they were not coming up with any like seriously actionable items. It was all just like random little things that like weren't meaningful. So it looked like it wasn't really catching any issues. And so I suggested that we actually try stopping the requirement for a code review to be able to merge stuff to main on the Flutter code base and then see what happened. And we trialed it for about 3 months. And after 3 months, what we found is that all the engineers who are working on the project felt like they had so much less overhead in terms of getting things merged to the code base. And then QA was not able to show any changes in our regressions on the other side. So it's like a very, 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 what's the word I want to say? Maybe it's very controversial opinion or thing to try. But in our case, because at that time our team was actually pretty small and the engineers who were working on that project were, in my opinion, very, very good. And so it happened to work out for us. But I would say that it was like a perfect storm of things working together that allowed us to actually pull something like that off. And I would not like recommend it to anybody, basically. But we were just able, like with our specific team, it just seemed to work out nicely.
That's so interesting. I find that I kind of resonate with that though, because I do feel like a lot of times I open a PR up and I know that there's maybe either rough edges or just things that like someone else due to stylistic approaches will kind of like comment on. But like 9 times out of 10, it's like, oh, hey, like this is a thought I have, but like no need to like change anything.
Yep.
Looks good to me. And then you merge it. And so like I just like the percentage of PRs that I actually end up changing something meaningful. Like sometimes it's just a refactor that like just makes it look a little nicer or makes it feel a little smoother. But like I don't really ever change anything meaningful. And so that's like a really interesting, I don't think it would ever fly at Betterment, but
it's
like
really
said,
hard to sell people on it. Like I had many conversations with people where they're like, wait, you want to do what exactly? And I was like, I know it sounds crazy, but like we've got data. Like, I don't know what you want to do with that.
Yeah, I do feel like, well, like I said before, my engineering philosophy is really different with Lumy and Betterment, but what I'm coming to realize, and I think a lot of people already know about this, I mean, there's memes about it, right? Is like, I feel like every engineer has this arc where it's like when you start and you're more junior and you learn things and you're like, that is gospel. That cannot be broken. Like, you need to do this X, Y, and Z thing. What I started noticing in like the staff and principal engineers at Betterment is that they've gotten to a place where like they're really able to tease out the things that really are gospel, and they're usually more abstract than the things that are rules. Yeah. And that you start to bend these rules, like you're saying, and so long as you have data to support like the actual analysis of the rule bending and breaking, like then you kind of can just like make these decisions and sort of like not, you go against the flow, so to speak. So I feel like I'm kind of like at that like point where I'm sort of getting to, and that where I'm actually starting to open my mind to like maybe everything doesn't have to be done, step ABC.
And then you end up in a world where you're like Casey, who has all singletons, and me too. But it's actually funny. There's this awesome Pablo Picasso quote that I love, and it goes something like, learn the rules like a pro so you can break them like an artist. And like that's what you're describing, is like when people start to get to like the staff and principal area, they're like, yeah, this stuff is like maybe a good idea to think about, but like let me show you all the ways where you can twist it and like bend it to your will.
Yeah. And people start poking holes in your approach. Like people will ask you like you'll say something like that's by the book, and they'll say, but like, why couldn't we do it this way? Or like, and like when people started asking me those questions at Betterment, or like, why do we have to follow this rule or whatever? And I didn't really have good answers. I was just regurgitating stuff that I learned as a junior. Like that's when I started to be like, all right, like put your ego aside. And I think you mentioned this, Luke, in one of your recent videos actually on YouTube, of just like not being like judgmental, but instead, what was the like that
oh yeah, it's like don't video? Be judgmental, be curious.
Yeah,
I actually got that from Ted Lasso. That's a really base TV show, by the way. It's totally worth watching.
Well, like people started being curious to me, and I felt like that like helped my curiosity bone be like, let's try to break this rule. Like why are we always doing this by the book? And so that video I actually really liked, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna try to be more curious. I think that's, like you said, it's a fundamental, I think, thing in engineering. So Anyway, Casey, I think I cut you off.
No, you're good. You're good. I think a big one too is you said you were manic about trying state management solutions. I think that is honestly a huge growth point for anybody using Flutter. That was like one of my big moments as I went through this brutal period of, I don't know, 2 to 3 months where I rewrote my project over and over and over with like 10 different state management projects. And it kind of feels like in the 80s action movie where you go into the montage sequence where you're like punching all these punching bags, you're doing crazy push-ups, you're dunking in the cold water, and you come out the other side, I think, with a really deep understanding of what those state management solutions are actually trying to solve and abstract and where the trade-offs are. And then after that, you can really come up with a much better idea of what you want to go with and approach those trade-offs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I think for all of us, we've ended up landing on much simpler things than like the options that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, aren't you guys just like pretty much? I mean, I pretty much for anything local, I'm a value notifier. Anything like semi non-local, I'm a signal, and like that's it. Like I think you guys are sort of in similar boats, except maybe even simpler.
Yeah, I would say a huge one for me. I love value notifier. I think it's criminally underrated. A very great pair with that is Context Watch. I don't know if you know that PubDev package. Watch. Such a good package because Value Listenable Builder is just such a pain to work with. So Value Notifier is like this awesome shining beacon on a hill, and then there's all this Value Listenable Builder barbed wire between you and it. So, and what Context Watch does for you is you can just call context.watch and then a listenable, or context.watchValue for value listenable, and bam, your build function, your widget are now bound to that listenable. And it just makes it so light and easy, no nesting, so I can put 5 to 10 different listenables just in a build function, and it all just works. Super, super clean.
So I use something pretty similar. I just call it singletons plus context watch. And what it basically is Firestore exposes all these streams, right? So I compose Firestore streams into other streams to get like derived state. And then I listen to those using Context Watch because those value streams are just global singletons, and they hold the state within that actual like container, if you will. And then anything like form state, I'll use change notifier. And then beyond that, I just use local widget state. And that's like my 3 layers of my architecture in it. It scales, it's simple. I mean, I've had people look at the project and say things like, man, I've been writing Flutter code for 4 years and I've never seen something so simple before. This like kind of makes me angry that I wasn't using something like it before. And it's like every year I swear I just like delete more things from like my concept of what good architecture is until there's like nothing left. I'm like pretty close to nothing left is what it feels like.
I just feel like your project is like, okay, so when I used to use Firebase for other apps, it was like I was all, junior, like by the book, like you got to have a repository, because if you don't have a repository and you want to swap out your Firebase implementation, then how are you going to do that? And like, when did I ever swap out a Firebase implementation for anything, right? So and then like, yeah, I would never have like a global stream, like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. But yeah, I think on the context watch thing, I don't know that there'd be a value add there for me, because I use hooks to use value notifier. Mm-hmm. So I just use state, and like to me, I like that it abstracts the value notifier stuff away, and I'm just like, oh, here's a state object thing that like automatically rebuilds my widgets. And then same with signal, so it has a .watch extension on it too, and so I kind of like I get all the benefits I think in the things that I use. But yeah, it sounds like we've all kind of converged on similar concepts. Like stop shimming like a bunch of garbage into your app just because you might one day possibly change out your backend implementation. And like, if you don't need like critical testing, like you're building some medical device software, like, and you can test, because global streams will allow you to test in integration testing, right? You build like integration tests, like you're good to go. So yeah, I think it's interesting that we've all landed in similar places. So
I do have a counterexample for you. Literally just today, I'm doing some like experimentation with a couple different SaaS providers, and I had to write up like a competitive analysis. And so I needed to write a repository, and I needed to swap out the backing implementations a bunch of times. So I went full clean architecture. I did everything by the books. And I don't think I would do it outside of this hilariously niche circumstance. But honestly, it was pretty fun to work with, and I get it. I do get it. Not going to use it outside of this, but I see where it's coming from. There's some elegance to that, like in college when you first experiment with breadth first search, depth first search, and you realize, oh, I can just change the priority on this priority queue. It's that head explode moment. I think there's still a lot of value in coming back to that in these super niche scenarios where you know it's going to make sense. And I think that comes back to being curious, where it's like, okay, there's something here, there's an idea here, and maybe it has its niche, and I can really pick and choose from that.
I think it makes sense for when you're doing a POC, like you were saying, Casey. I also think it makes sense if you're doing something like you want to actually have multiple services simultaneously. So like I run multiple analytics providers simultaneously because every single one is free, right? And for like what I'm using it for. And then, for example, PostHog has just the awesome dashboarding. So I use that for like my day-to-day. And then on Firebase Analytics through BigQuery, I use that as like my data warehouse, so to speak. So everything gets stored there. I know where it's going to be. And then I can also use PostHog for my day-to-day. But no, I definitely remember when I first got started, I was doing abstract interfaces for every single service class. And I just got to the point where I was like if I am in a situation where I need to do a lift and shift, that feels like $1 million problem, not like I'm going to like build all this architecture for my, 1,000 users app problem. You know what I mean?
So bad. I was just saying, I was a tech lead at a past job, and I was still in that like phase of abstract everything using Kotlin too. So like just a ton of like weird infrastructure choices that I made. And like, guys, we got to do this. We got to do it so we can swap it out later. And like now I've like sort of, I don't want to say matured, but I moved on from that like kind of mentality, leaving in the wake, like, all this code, like probably like tens of thousands of lines of extra code for my teammates who are still there to like handle. So I do feel bad, but yeah, I think we've all been there.
I'm curious, you talked about maybe swapping out different providers as a use case for this. I'm wondering if you've considered Lumy having different backing providers. I don't know how tightly coupled you are to that specific API or not, but that could be a really cool place where you pick where your backing data comes from.
Yeah. My buddy literally yesterday asked me about that. He's like, could you build a DAL to like basically talk to all these different providers, and like the user would choose what provider they want to talk to? And like, yes, I think the concept would be take your core models, like what you're representing in the app, abstract them, have those be returned probably from like Lumy's actual server, and then like basically have Lumy server be a proxy for those different providers. So I think, and honestly, how I've set things up, I don't think it would be terribly hard, but I think actually the product like fit or opportunity is what's more like blocking there. I looked up like Monarch is a new one on the scene. They already have like charts in their app. Their API is either not public or not well documented. And I looked at another one, smaller, but also in the scene, Actual Budget, came on the scene when YNAB raised their price, and a lot of people were looking to like escape. Actual Budget is like self-hosted, and I think also has like some other complexities that like would make it not really that appetizing. So I'm open to the idea in the future, and I think it'd be possible, obviously, but I actually don't know that there's like a lot of like providers that would like have the same weaknesses that YNAB does in terms of the reporting and the data and stuff. So again, I'm going to like wait till maybe someone is like, oh, I wish I had Lumy for blah, blah, blah. And if there's enough people that say that, then I'll like definitely entertain the idea, but not until then.
So you had talked about shipping fast, and I wondered if you had a chance to look at Shorebird for code push, and if that's something that's like interesting to you for Lumy.
Yeah, Shorebird is super interesting for me. I actually have a GitHub action right now already written that deploys using Shorebird, but I choose not to use it right now. I built it when I was testing Shorebird. I deployed to test flight actually at the time, and I tested it. And at the time, iOS performance was like real bad. Like they just the way like noticeably bad. But the tricky thing about my app is that it's so performance sensitive because it's building. So just to give you an idea, I have a YNAB account that's about. My current budget goes back like 5 years. In those 5 years, I have something like 9,000 or 10,000 transactions. Mm-hmm. And so for things that are pulling like from the entire depth or the entire history of my budget, they're kind of iterating through 9,000 transactions and just doing simple things, iterating over that many transactions I've measured takes like on the order of like 50, 60, sometimes more milliseconds. And that's obviously like outside of our 60 FPS kind of threshold. So anyway, like long story short, Shorebird kind of like made that worse. So when you have already kind of time sensitive stuff and then you bring in like bad performance from another thing, it made it really bad. So I put that on the back burner, but Eric over at Shorebird is like super on top of it, and they're like looking to ship stable soon. And once that happens, I'll probably like clean up my workflow, ship a test build, and if it works really well, like that's going to be a game changer for Lumy. Like being able to fix bugs and stuff in Logic is going to be amazing. So yeah, I'm definitely going to be using it as soon as possible.
Now, how are you doing those aggregations on your past data? You said you have a local database, and then are you doing like a client-side aggregation on top of that?
Literally, yes. Everything is client-side. Nothing is on the server except for like OAuth management because I wanted to keep my private key private, the app's private key. And so everything's local. The way that I do any bit of data crunching happens on a background isolate. So if I have to say like take all the transactions and find which ones meet some kind of criteria and I need to iterate over all of them, I have a function that runs on a background isolate, which is managed by the actors package, which I want to put a plugin for because it's awesome. It makes a lot of this super easy. Because before, what you can do is you can just call compute, I think, which is like Flutter. I think a Flutter specific way of like using a background isolate. But if you call compute 50 times, it like spins up 50 different isolates. That's not going to work. So actors allows you to do everything over 1 to like n number of isolates. And so I use that. And so basically like goes to a background isolate, comes back. And then like the idea is that's all done asynchronously. And then so values are exposed asynchronously to the charts that just render them. There's a lot of footguns there and a lot of stuff that I could probably improve, but that's kind of like how I'm doing all my like aggregation and data calculation stuff.
Cool. All right, we're getting pretty close here. Is there anything else you want to touch on at this point?
I don't think so.
Okay, cool. Then what I will say is, Brandon, it's been just amazing having you on the podcast. We hope that you'll show up again here in the future, give us an update. I want to give you a chance to plug anything that obviously you're working on Lumy, so maybe you can plug a website or a place for people to download. But before you do that, I just want to plug State Beacon. It's a state management package that I want to check out here too, especially because it sounds like you've had good success with it.
Yeah, definitely. I want to plug that. I mean, Lumy would be kind of somewhat lost without it because I wouldn't have state management. So I'll plug that. I don't really even know how to plug Lumy, which is kind of sad. I mean, we have a website, lumyforynab.app, but it won't really help you find Lumy because it's just our privacy policy. So somewhere there's a link tree, and if you can find
What about your Twitter?
Yeah, find it on Twitter. So it's Brando because I couldn't have a long username. Brando Trautmann. Trautmann on Twitter, Brando Trautmann. So if on there in my profile I have the link tree that you can download it. I need to do better.
We'll put you in the show notes too, so people will be able to find it easily.
Awesome.
Okay, and then the last thing I had for you is there anybody you want to nominate to come on the podcast? Someone who's building in public?
Oh man, I would have nominated one of you two guys, but that's awkward because you're someone that's building in public. Oh, there's so many people that I follow. Oh, have you guys had? Is his name Sebastian?
Sebastian.
Yeah, I know that's like an easy like T-ball answer. But if you guys can't be Ship Fam without having him, I mean, I feel like he's just doing it. So he's doing the thing we want to be doing, right? So.
He's the one who's pulling it off. Yeah, no, well, that's a great
honorable
nomination.
mention, though, for who I love to hear talk a lot about stuff is that Mike, who does a lot of the material design stuff and manages, Flexing Scheme. Yeah, I don't know if he's building like apps per se, but he's just, I mean, I'm also benefiting from his work, and I think he's got some real depth in terms of the Flutter world. So he'd be another great add.
Mike is great. I appreciate the suggestion of Sebastian. I've been following him too, and what he's doing is really amazing. So, cool.
Elizabeth too. You got to get Elizabeth on here. I know that's 3 answers. I'm sorry.
No need to nominate Liz. We've already got her on the list.
Yeah, there may be something happening here, a little something happening here in the future. So we'll find out. Cool. Is there anything else you wanted to chat about, Brandon?
No, I mean, thanks guys for having me. I appreciate it. And I'd love to be on it in the future if Lumy, takes off hopefully and can, hit the $50 MRR, then we'll really be in the money and I'll come back and give the update. But it's been a pleasure, guys.
Love it.
Cool.